direct democracy and the benefits of a representative democracy come together into the form of liquid democracy, we see that this comes together and further provides a society with the most effective way of promoting democratic principles, the most effective way of dealing with policies, but most importantly, the most effective way of working fairly as a society as a whole. So what are we talking about in this debate? There are two major definitions in the House today. Firstly, the one about liquid democracy. And as I said, liquid democracy is a balance between direct democracy and representative democracy. People can either go and vote directly for policies into a government, or they can vest their voting power into a representative known as a delegate, who will then go and vote for their favor or in their favor. However, for these delegates, there is no set term for how long they will represent this person that has vested votes into them, and also this means that the person itself can whenever revoke this vote, this delegation of the vote for that person, if he doesn't agree with his ideals or if he no longer stands for the ideals of that person. So the term here is important. Secondly, the digital media. This means clearly that voting is able to be done via digital platforms such as mobile phones or computers. This will be able to put out to the public when a policy is suggested by a number of citizens in proportion to how big the country is population-wise, or otherwise by the professional politicians deeming it important to be in place. We'll also have, as I said, the people can vest their votes to delegates, but we also have people that work as professional politicians and are more trusted than others. We will see that there will be people that take on less of others' votes, and we see that there will be people that will act as delegates for more other people, and thus similarly works to that of, no thank you.
Clarification.
Okay, go ahead.
How is the government formed under your system?
A government is formed. We see that there will be people that will either choose to vote directly for a policy, or they will be able to delegate their vote to another person. And when a person is of the type that he works in order to go around to people, when he works in the way of getting a lot of trust from these people and being delegated a lot of votes, he takes on the role of a type of politician. However, he does not have a defined term for being this politician, and if he is therefore has this vote delegated, he is higher up in the rank and acts as a sort of government. However, once again, not for a set and defined term.
Point of clarification.
Okay, go ahead.
Will anyone be able to have this position of representative, like private
No,
companies as well?
I'm going on to this right now on my model. It is only individuals that are above legal voting age, above the age of 18. These people can only vote, and these are the people that can be delegated and have the qualities vested in them. And now our burden of proof on this side is to show that this liquid democracy is combining direct and representative democracy, will provide more democratic principles for society and will work as a more effective democracy as a whole in the society. So today I'll bring forth three substantive points. Firstly, that it fights populism that harms democracy. Secondly, that it is more effective in the way in both cost and time. And finally, that it brings the democracy within the country closer to the real world. So firstly, how it fights populism. Now in regular democracies right now, we see that the politicians go around and campaign and get votes to people, and it is usually those, when the people aren't able to vote directly into the government, they have to vest their votes into these people, and they vest their votes into people they see most attractive to them. And what type of politicians are these? Those that have enough money and leverage to provide campaigns and go out to all of the types of people. And we see that those people that then get votes vested into them are the richer, and the richer they can afford this. And there are two problems with this. That the money spent on the campaigns could go elsewhere. It could go into working on infrastructure, into working on infrastructure, into working on other places within the society, instead of spending the money on campaigns for the democracy itself. And also, this also means that only the richer get the place in politics. Only the richer are able to provide leverage in the governmental level. Whereas in liquid democracy, we provide even anyone, despite their economical status, to go into politics and to be able to make a change in the democratic principle. So we see that this fights populism, and it brings down democracy to come down not only into the economic way, but also it takes it away from this elite controlling the political spectrum. Moreover, moving on to the effectivity. Now, in the democratic system as we see now, we see that the politicians that have power vested into them, they have to vote on important policies and that are outside of their field very often. And now, such as climate change, such as voting on climate change and voting on other monetary parties. And there are two things these politicians can do. Either they go on and decide themselves and get to vote for themselves. What happens there, it's very ineffective because usually these politicians take on the generic role of deciding in every single space around what the government does. And this is bad because they aren't in the form of their expertise, and therefore liquid democracy will provide people that actually have the expertise to go in there. And secondly, they can consult other experts in the field. This takes time, this costs money, whereas in liquid democracy, the expert himself can go up and vote. Go ahead.
Who executes policies under your plan? So again, who is the government under your plan?
The government, we have a ministry of a government. We are not talking about the executive branch. Here we're talking about the legislative branch that votes on policies and that ensures what types of policies get. We are not talking about the police department. We are not talking about the Department of Justice. We're talking about who decides on which policies and which policies get preferred. We're talking about the legislative branch of the government, not the executive one. So moving further on, and this will be much more effective because people who are experts in the field will be able to go and vote in the media. No, thank you. And then finally, that brings people closer to the real world. We see that politicians stay in a spectrum and stay in a circuit with other politicians and do not come close to the real world. Whereas regular people will now be able to see people around them, people they are interactive in society, and see how society is dynamic, and they will be able to vest their vote into people that they trust, that they interact with on a daily basis, and see that those are the experts in the field. Whereas if we have it as it is right now, the politicians do not have this interaction with society and often take decisions that aren't close to the real world. So by having liquid democracy, we'll bring closer to the real world because we will actually have society itself and the societal circuits that influence the policies. So because it fights populism, because it is more effective in the way, and also because it brings democracy closer to the real world, liquid democracy is the way to go.
Okay, and now we open the floor for Leader of Opposition. Here.
Real democracy is not just about having a majority vote, the team proposition seems to believe today. It's also about protecting various minorities in the country, which is where we stand on our side of the house today. I'll be covering this in my substantive manner in two arguments. First of all, on how our side of the house stands for real democracy, and second of all, how their side of the house is going to be ineffective. But before I get into that, I have 2 points of rebuttal. First of all, on the point of the fighting populism, and second of all, on the effectivity. So on the first point, he talked about how it was unfair because politicians today were campaigning around the country and so on. Well, on our side of the house, we see this is actually a good thing because they go around, they're informing people of the policies that they have. So we don't really have any problem with people campaigning. Furthermore, they talked about how it was only for the richer population, only the rich people would actually become politicians. Well, we see this is false, because the actual politicians, they get donations from various private companies, various different associations. It's not the government that are paying for their campaigning. It's various parties and private donations that agree with their policies to donate to them. For example, Obama, he didn't actually get any money from the government for his campaign. He was getting it from private companies that agreed with him, leftist companies that agreed with him. No, thank you. Besides, furthermore, we see also the delegates, they still have to campaign. So we see that issue is still relevant on their side of the House today. So we see that point falls quite easily. Furthermore, on the effectivity point, the second point they brought up today, they talked about how it was bad because politicians decide everything. Well, what we see on their side of the house is that the experts in these fields, they're only going to care about, the actual, maybe the science behind something. They're not going to be considering the various minorities within the country or, the effectivity of a policy, long-term effects of a policy. Politicians are taught to think like that, and that is why we have politicians. Yes?
One problem do you think you're actually maximizing? We think that we'd rather have it digitally. We don't care if society, we think that it actually depends on whether or not society buys into it. Not just because politics are actually supposed to be maximized by specific
well, as we said, as I've been saying, politicians, they care much more about the minorities, about the long-term effects. We see that if someone votes digitally, as I'll be getting onto my substantive, they're also going to be uninformed citizens voting on just about anything without really considering. But continuing this, we see that, furthermore, they talked about how there's going to be the politicians, they don't have any expertise. But then in that point, they also said that they even said that the politicians, they can rely on experts, and the only substantive on why this was bad was because it was expensive. On our side of the house, we see that it doesn't really matter. We want to make the right decisions, and we see that the cost of hiring an expert just on these few policies doesn't really matter. But we see that politicians, they much more consider the long term and the different minorities within the country, and that's why we see that they're much better. But now moving on to my substantive on the real democracy, starting with the first point on the real democracy. As we said, it's about protecting everyone within the country, not just about having a minority vote. We see that politicians, they care more about the different stakeholders in different policies. They're going to consider, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they're going to consider the Lutherans in the country, all these things, If you have your scientist voting on it, he's only going to be considering the basic science. He's not going to be considering how it affects various people. They're used to think like this, they're trained to think like this, and that is why we should have politicians. Other people, with their own jobs, they're not really considering, as I said, everything. They just consider the science behind it, or whatever the expertise is. For example, if we had, a policy on making organ donation compulsory, I would probably vote yes on this. I believe a lot of people might vote in this country, in this room, might also vote yes. But it doesn't actually mean a lot to me. I don't really consider organ donation to be very bad or to be very bad. I don't really have that much of an opinion on it. But to someone who might be a Jehovah's Witness, this is completely against their religion. So this means a lot more to them. So we see my majority vote on this case is not really going to be very fair, because they're going to be heard a lot more than we are. It's fundamentally against their religion, and hence it means a lot more to them than it does to anyone in this room. Yes?
Why can't we let society decide whether or not they want a specific group of people to rule them?
Because, as I've been saying, they don't consider all the things. We just consider, okay, we said an organ donation, we think that's a good thing, so we're going to vote on that. But we're not considering, if we make it compulsory, how it's going to affect Jehovah's Witnesses. So we need to consider, for example, utilitarianism. Do we overall society actually benefit from this policy? We see that the loss by Jehovah's Witnesses is a lot greater than the gain from anyone else. So it's a lot greater loss than from, if this policy was voted, then it would be a gain for me. Furthermore, we see that this is going to be irreversible. If suddenly you've taken, an organ, you made it compulsory, and you take an organ from Jehovah's Witness, he's going to hell. According to his religion, he's going to hell now. We're not going to be able to do anything to reverse this policy now. So we see that it means a lot more to him than it does to us, and that is why we should consider real democracy and politicians that actually consider all of these groups before they vote on policy. But now moving on to my second point of substantive on the ineffectivity. So on this I have 2 points. First of all, on the uninformed citizens, and second of all, how it's going to speed up the process and why this is going to be bad. So on the uninformed citizens. Now, if you're just a regular person, you're going through a daily life, you probably have a job, you might have kids and so on, so we see that you don't really have time to stay informed on everything. So what happens under our model? As I said, right now they don't really have the time to read up on it. But every 4 years, they will be able to look into the different political candidates. They'll be able to see, their major beliefs, and they'll say, okay, I agree with most of these things, right? Every 4 years, we believe that they will have the time to read up on this. But we don't believe that they're going to have time to read up on this every single day, which is what they have on their side of the house today. On their side of the house today, you have to go. You will have time to go up and vote on their side of the house today, but you will actually have time to, consider everything that your delegate stands for, and everything that actually, as I said, not considering the long-term effect and so on. You won't have time to actually read up on everything within the policy, but still, you will want your opinion to go through, because people are selfish. If they really believe in something, they will want to present their opinion without really having considered all the aspects. So you're still going to want to have your exact opinion to go through. So on the day of the vote, you're going to go and vote, but throughout the other days before that, you didn't actually have time to read up on it, but you will still want to pass your vote on this. So we see, why should you actually elect a representative if you can just go, digitally on your phone, on your smartphone, on your way to work, without reading up on the policy? You'll just say, okay, organ donation, okay, that we should make that compulsory now. So again, we can imagine a single mom working full time. What time does she actually have to look up on these issues? but you're still going to vote on it. So this is why they'll stay uninformed on their side. But moving on to how it's going to speed up the process. Again, what we see right now is we see careful deliberation by various different parties, right? For example, in the US, we see, 3 branches. First, we have the House of Representatives, then we have Congress, then we have the President. It takes a long time for policy to pass through these. And through all of this, you start considering, not only the people, but all the different representatives here, they consider the various benefits and disadvantages of this policy and the long-term effects, right? We see that this is also a checks and balances, which on their side of the house is going to be ruined. People are just going to go, as I said, on a day and vote and not really consider the long-term effects, and it's not going to pass through all of these different things. So they'll ruin the checks and balances. On their side of the house, again, like I said, they're simply going to vote once. The policy is very easily going to go through, and it's going to be irreversible. I already mentioned several bad effects on utilitarianism. This, for example, a Jehovah's Witness losing the organ, that's now going to hell. We can't really stop this from happening if we don't really consider long-term. So we see no long-term consideration of effects. We see no steady state thing. Whereas on outside of the house, all this time, people are considering, right? People are considering the issue, maybe new issues come up, new pros and cons come up in this, and they actually consider all the stakeholders. So if you stand for real democracy, if you stand for an effective democracy, you should vote for team proposition, no team opposition.
Thank you very much for that fine speech, and now we invite the Deputy Prime Minister to deliver his speech.
Okay, so before I move on to my 2 substantive points, talking about the importance of influence, direct influence, and how this can actually boost democracies in places that have weak democracies right now, I'd like to firstly rebuild and then rebuild. So over to rebuilding. Now they said that I'm actually not fighting populism, and that delegates will also need to go around and campaigning. But this is completely ignoring my deep analysis on how these delegates and these people will be so much closer to society than other politicians. Politicians going around campaigning, they have to go around the entire country, and the only thing that matters to them is the voice on their speaker. The only thing that matters to them is the amount of money they could have paid to make a nice tent in there. However, if we have liquid democracy, this campaigning will firstly take place on a much smaller scale, where the people can actually relate to the people in a much more normal way, in a much more democratic way, by culture of discussion. And secondly, these delegates will be a lot closer to the people. They will know which issues are actually going on, because they will be interacting with these people on a daily basis. Not like politicians stuck in their circuit and not being able to go down to the level of normal society.
Sure.
So as it is closer to the people, we will see that, as they are closer to the people, we will see that campaigning will not be tantamount to the amount of money you have, but the way you're actually democratically appealing to these people. Now moving on, they also said that politics actually isn't about the rich, and because they don't somehow get money. But the problem here is that the politicians that are in the politics have the money to climb up that ladder. Right now in the system we have, there is a ladder in politics, and unless you're at the top of the ladder, you do not have the political influence politicians have right now. And what we're doing with liquid democracy, we're completely undermining this ladder and taking it completely away from society, because we believe it's bad. We don't need a ladder in a democracy that you can climb up based on which contacts you have or how rich you are. What we need is that you go up this ladder based on how appealing you are and how good your principles and how much people democratically trust you. So on our side of the house, with liquid democracy, we completely get rid of this ladder, and therefore we do not stand for the politics being for the rich. Go ahead.
Sir, what we see under your system as well is the delegates trying to climb this ladder because they're
Thank you.
incentivized to get as many votes as possible.
They climb this ladder, but they do not climb this ladder in the way politicians do. They do not climb this ladder by being born to an already existing politician, or by having the money to provide vast campaigns that will reach the entire country. They climb this ladder by talking to people around them, by talking to their friends, because delegates won't have the support of millions. They'll have the support of the close to them. They'll have the support of their friends who have vested their interest in them because they know who this person is. We will have delegates that are closer to the people, no thank you, rather than politicians. Then, moving on to my rebuttal. That firstly, that we're not protecting minorities, and finally, how it's ineffective. So only protecting a minority. Now what they talked about and what they described is a very extreme form of direct democracy, where every single individual can act in his own self-interest and go and vote. But this is not the case with liquid democracy. As I said, liquid democracy is a balance between the representative democracy and direct democracy. And this balance is derived from the combination of people wanting to go and vote and people not caring and instead vesting their votes in the delegates. And the delegates themselves will have the same checks and balances imposed on them as politicians have right now. They won't want to lose that spot, and they will try to act in a way that will ensure that people trust them further on, because they do not have a set term there in office. They do not have this guarantee that, oh, I'll be here in 4 years, I don't have to care about minorities. They'll actually be in there, and without a set term, they'll actually have to care for minorities because they'll need this trust. Therefore, we see that we are protecting minorities in the same way as they want to. On the point of ineffectivity, well, they said about uninformed citizens. And they said that people won't be read up on something and then they won't vote about it. Now let's look at how it actually works right now in a representative democracy. All those people that aren't read up on it, on an issue, they probably don't care about the issue, and then they don't go and vote on the issue. The same thing is happening when we have referendums in representative democracy. In Sweden, a few years ago, we had a referendum on the euro, if we were to have the euro. But before that, a study was conducted, and we saw that people don't actually care about the currency they have in Sweden. And what happened? The turnout for the referendum was under 50%. It was 48%. And what this shows is that people that aren't read up on something don't care about it and won't go on and vote for it. What does that mean? They'll vest their interest in a delegate that actually votes, that actually is interested in and is known in the specific area of voting, and thus we will see that the effectiveness will be same in the way of representative, just that. In the same of representative democracy, just that if the people actually are interested, they'll be able and directly go to vote for the policy, not have to go through a politician. So moving on to my positive matter. Firstly, about the importance of always being able to influence a policy despite a politician's term. Now, what I already talked about, the core problem with representative democracy and the way democracies are right now is that they have a set and defined term. When we vote a politician into office, he is there to put forth legislature for 4 or 5 years. And he knows that when he's in the office, unless he commits something completely atrocious, he'll be there for these 4 years. And thus his interest for what he's doing will gradually go down. But what is worse, if we have presidents and other legislatures that know that they have a maximum of 2 terms, they'll do their best the first 4 terms, and then they might be completely different people the second time they're voted in, the second 4 terms. And therefore we see that politicians won't actually be the voracious type of people they are. But on the other hand, in liquid democracy, when the people do not have a set term and when they do not fight for a guaranteed second term, when they actually are in place only while they're good, we see that the people and the delegates will provide their very voracious point of view. Sebastian.
If you are president of the United States, everyone is looking at you. Do you really think they are just going to slack off in this position?
No, thank you. But we see that when President Obama was in his first 4 year term, he was very reluctant to conducting war, and he was very reluctant in going out and talking about how U.S. would go into wars. But now when he's in second term, he's much more prone to talking about these issues, and he's much more prone of showing USA as an aggressive country. Why? Because he now has the guarantee that, okay, no more, I have these 4 years, I can do what I want. This undermines the veracity of the politician, something that is very bad, and delegates won't have this because they do not have these set terms. And finally, my last point, how this will boost democracies in countries which suffer from democracies. We say that in countries such as India, which do have a vast internet spread, and in other countries that are weakly democratic, we see vast internet spread and vast spread of these devices they can vote with. And with this combination of liquid democracy, we will see a much lower rate of sellout of votes. We will see a much lower rate of politicians being corrupt and unveracious, because we will see that the people themselves will now finally be able to take it into their own hands and go and vote for a policy if they want to, or if they feel like they aren't educated, or if they feel like they do not want to address this issue, they can invest it into a delegate that has an education in these countries. And thus we will see that the democratic principles and the democratic process within these countries will be able to evolve in a way it wouldn't on their side of the house. So because liquid democracy provides the best democratic principles, and because it is the way to go, vote for the proposition.
too much.
Thank you very much, and now we give the floor to the deputy leader of the opposition.
I'm not sure if we can still listen to this man, as he is the prime minister, and he doesn't seem really to believe in himself. What we see here is, though, that we have some arguments, and I'll take them all down, because it's quite simple. I'll first start off by explaining who actually creates the best politicians and the best decision makers. And secondly, I'll be analyzing two kinds of policies that we go through. Policies that people don't care about, and policies that people actually do care about. So, firstly, who creates the best politicians and decision makers? Now, proposition came up here and says that, well, right now it's only about who's the richest. Well, I'd like to just give you the example of Obama. Obama is not the richest man on the planet, he's far from. He's a university teacher who got a lot of votes from his actual potential. He has the potential to sway the public, he has the potential to be a good politician, and that's why people trusted him and gave him money to campaign. This is the ladder we support. However, it is not just the richest man of people that actually get through. We see that people actually inform themselves. We see that politicians have to go through numerous interviews, have to go through numerous debates, and they have to actually win these. Otherwise, they won't make it through. No, thank you, sir. This ladder is not about who's the richest, because you actually have to get votes to get through this ladder. This ladder is about who is actually the best informed, it's about who's the best debater, and it's the one who actually does the best job as a politician, because he has to be chosen. If you want to be the representative of the Democratic Party, you have to beat another 5 participants. That doesn't mean you have to be the richest, that means that you have to be the best in debates. No, thank you, ma'am. So this ladder is something we support and actually helps us create better politicians. However, what we see on liquid democracy is that this ladder looks a bit different. It is not about being the smartest, it's not about winning interviews, it's about friends politics. It's about who in your neighborhood is actually your best neighbor. Who is the best friend? Who actually can you trust or something? However, is this really what we see in a politician that actually needs to make decisions on a daily basis? We don't get the best friend. We want to have someone who can take the best action. Go ahead.
Please tell us how you then maximize the pillars of democracy again.
Well, okay. If you ask a question like this, please outline the pillars of democracy before we can actually ask that. I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest. So, what we see though is that the French politics that is promoting this delegacy system. Okay, so first we have the bottom ones, okay, maybe your neighborhood delegates, who the most people vote. Then we see another delegate who's in charge of the state. We already see that this becomes more like our system. However, see that we don't really have any use in the bottom delegate because these are not the best politicians. These are your best friend and your best neighbor. So it's much more about French politics and much less about actually getting through the political ladder that gets you on the top. So it's not about being the richest, it's about being the smartest and the most cunning to actually get through the system, and these actually make the best system. Then we got that, okay, well, because you only have a 4-year term, or then you don't care about. We see that Obama doesn't care about the country anymore. This is completely useless argumentation, because this is not true. If everyone is looking at you as the President of the United States, you're not going to slack off. He is busy day and night, I'm telling you, actually making policy. It's not like he's going now, oh, this is now the time actually I can do whatever I want. I'm the President of the United States, look at me. No, if he makes bad decisions, he is still punished for it, and he knows this. So he'll still do the best job he can. No, thank you, man. Also, you don't want to enter a presidency looking like the worst presidents in United States history. You don't also, as a congressman, you actually want to end up being good, and you can go on to a next job, you can give presentations, you can actually be seen as a good person, and not someone who completely use their power for wrong. This is not the system, this is not what we see in practice. We do not see people only acting out of free will because, why do I even care? I'll go selected again. In the delegate system, this is also not really changing because, I mean, the delegates don't have that much power, so why would they even care as much? They have jobs to care about, they have other things to care about, why would they care so much about policy? However, I'll now go on to my next point of contention, which is the short-term decision, the decisions that no one cares about. So we see that what actually happens here. In the digital system, you get an email like, oh, you have a policy you can vote for. We're making it much easier for the people that do not care to actually care, or to actually make a vote. This is what we're doing, right? Because you're getting an email that says, you get a policy, do you want to vote? People might say, yes, I want to vote. Even though they have zero informed decision about this, they have nothing. So we're actually making it easier. On both sides, we actually agree that this is a bad thing, right? So we're making it easier for people to vote on policies that they do not know about, which this system actually does. We also see that what Team Proposition is trying to say is that we're going to get more experts. However, there's no system here that actually selects scientific experts or anything. We're just seeing that the delegates, the best friends, are actually getting to do this. So we're not seeing a politician, which is an entire team backing him up, which has experts on several areas actually help him. This is not what we're seeing. We're just seeing some people making random decisions for others. Well, they also have jobs in the end. They also have a family to take care of. They don't have a full-time job in politics as someone who can actually work day and night on making the best policy for his people. Because you have a responsibility for your people if you are a politician, much more than as a delegate, because your power is much less. Okay, so now on to my substantive about the long, the decisions that people actually care about. Situations such as abortion, such as what side of the road do we drive on? And this is where the system extremely fails, because what we see is that right now we get to have an actually expert decision on it. We do not see people on it. We get a system that has ministries. We have the Ministry of Education, we have the Ministry of Railways, or whatever. We have, no, thank you, ma'am. We have these people making the decisions. They have experts, they have people with data, they have people looking at the data, they have numerous pros and cons, data analysis. If people actually care, right, they won't look at this, but they will still be like, oh, abortion is great for me, or I'm really against abortion. They will make the decision on their own. This is where they do actually vote, and this is where you'll see a massive amount of voting on the issues that people actually care about. So what we see here is that we're not having ministries making decisions. We don't have experts, we have the people. And this is where it fails, because, for example, in Sweden, there was a referendum on which side of the road we should drive on. We always used to drive on the left, which is a very bad decision if you look in the mirror. However, then, referendums say we're staying on the left. What did the politicians do? We're going to the right. We actually made it. We didn't listen to the referendum, we went to the right. This was actually a very good decision, completely drove down the number of accidents. So we see that actually when experts make decisions, we make the right decisions. And when there's a motion that people care about, such as the euro, with 50% is still a lot of people, that's half the country. So I don't see this as being a small amount. But where things actually care about, we see people making decisions and not the ministries that we have to. We also see that there's a possibility, and there's no fail-safe in the system. We don't have three branches making decisions. We don't have an executive branch taking down the vote. We have just the people making the decision. In a normal checks and balances system, we have checks and balances. So there's a fail-safe. If it goes through the House of Representatives, we sell to Congress to say, wait, maybe this is not such a good decision. However, here, we can make huge decisions in a very, very rapid time frame, which is exactly what we do not want. We also see that votes can be bought, for example. People can say, well, I don't really care about this vote, but I'm going to give you money, though, if you vote up. Why not? It's much easier through this electronic system. We're making it much too easier to make policy. We have to take everything under consideration. Ministries can do this. People cannot do this. Experts can do this. People cannot do this. And delegates can also not do this because they don't have the time. Thank you. No one got my intro. He's the Prime Minister.
Excuse me. Can I please leave
Yeah.
for the chamber of secrets?
Yeah.
6 minutes.
Release?
That's a funny one.
See, no, that's a funny joke. See.
I thought it was clever. Okay. I thought it was clever.
Somebody else want water?
I like this one. I think it's good. No?
Yeah. You have one of your own if you want. This color, this color, this color. Okay, now we open the floor for member of government.
Ladies and gentlemen, we need effective democracy that actually represents the society and the thoughts of the society. And that's why we need liquid democracy, implementation of liquid democracy by digital voting. Okay, so before I go on with my constructive, I would like to go on with some rebuttal and then go on to my extension. Okay, so first, side opposition has told us a few things. So first they talked about what real democracy is. Second, they talked about how this is ineffective. Third, they talked about how this speeds up the process. Fourth, they talked about who is the best decision maker. And five, they talked about how this system fails. Okay, so first, let's go on to this idea of real democracy. Okay, so they talked about what real democracy is, and we need to focus on the minorities and stuff like that. Okay, what we see here is that society votes for idea and position. Society actually votes on what they want as a whole, right? And we want to focus both on the minorities and the majorities. And some of these minorities can't vote if we don't have this idea of digital voting, because they might have some problems that maybe they can't go to the booth to vote or something like that. So we need digital voting. No, thank you. Okay, so we talked about how some of these minorities can't vote, and that's why we need digital voting. And if we get if we get this electronic voting in place, it will make this actually speed much faster and make it more effective. Okay, second, they talked about the ineffectiveness of this digital voting and stuff like that. So they said exact opinions can't get through very well. They talked about how people didn't have enough time to go and stuff like that. Okay, we see that that's why we need electrical voting, right? If they don't have the time to the booth, they can always use like efficient ways like apps or something they always have, right? They always have access to this internet, access to this apps, and they can always get involved with this and actually make this happen. So, no thank you. So that's why we think that electrical voting is actually more effective than just going to a booth and voting themselves. Okay, so third, they talked about how this speeds up the process. We didn't really see like how this speeds up the process. They didn't really talk about it very much. So I think that side actually completely failed. Okay, so first and fourth, they actually talked about who the best decision maker is and stuff like that. Okay, what we actually see on side proposition is that we think that the society is best at decision making, right? Most people, if we look at democracy, the society actually decides what they want as a whole. And it's not depending on society. We don't want depending on the power. It's not about the smartest, not people about people with the richest and people with more power. We think that society as a whole, they actually need to make this decision because that's what society wants. In a democracy, we need thoughts and policies that what society wants, not people with power, not people with lots of knowledge. We think that we need to implement this policy with the whole society as a whole. Okay, lastly, they talked about how this system fails. Okay, they said, no thank you, they said how people making decisions, like the society making decision completely fails, and we need the best and brightest people who's actually making the decision for the society, and we think that's completely false, okay? We think that if society is not satisfied with a policy that people with the brightest and smartest people like that actually make the decisions for the society, we don't think that is democracy. Like, we don't think that's what society wants. It's only the view of the people with most power, like with a lot of like knowledge, right? We think that we need to implement this situation with people with a lot of with society as a whole. Okay, so let's go on. So no, thank you. Let's go on with some extensions. Okay, first we're going to be talking about how the benefits of digital voting. Second, we're going to be looking at different perspectives. Okay, so first let's look at the benefits of digital voting. Let's look at what digital voting is, right? Voting with electronics and apps and stuff like that. And why do we need this digital voting, right? For example, in Canada, the maximum voter turnout was 60%. And this is not enough for the whole society. What about the 40%? What about the 40% that actually have thoughts and stuff like that, okay? And let's look at the people who doesn't vote, right? don't vote because maybe they're a minority, like they can't get to the voting booth or something like that. They don't have enough thoughts on this. And we need more, I'll take a moment. We need more participation, not only the rich, but about the whole society and not about the smart people. Wouldn't you agree, sir?
Ma'am, when Obamacare was in place, the poorest of the people could not access it because they didn't have internet. How does this problem tackle this?
Okay, so the people, we're giving them a choice rather to go there, or we're just saying that this is a choice. Electronic voting is a choice. We're not saying that they have to use electronic voting as a decision. Okay, so let's talk about how this effect of process of voting by electronics would actually make this better. This would make it better representation for all the people because people more can get access to voting. And second, we will think, no thank you, we think that there will be better democracy for the whole, no thank you. Okay, second, let's talk about the different perspectives. So like we're gonna be looking at one perspective which is political, second perspective we'll be looking at the social perspective, and we'll be also looking at some benefits of digital voting. I mean, we already talked about that. Okay, so different perspective. Let's look at political perspective. Okay, so if more people vote, and if like the voting turnout is more than 60%, and if more, like if the society is able to vote more, this will create competitions between the political parties, right? Political parties will want to get their political party voted, right? Then that's if more people vote, then they will work towards more things. They'll work towards goals that will benefit the society as a whole, right? So then this will make better services to the citizens. This will provide better services, making people's lives better and more effective. So that's why we need more voter turnout, right? More participation, and that will actually create more competition because people will more want different things and more of a different thing, so we can focus on more of what people want. Okay, so and because we're looking at this political perspective, let's look into some pillars of democracy. Okay, so let's look at two of the pillars of democracy. First, representation. Second, participation. Representation, as I've told you, if we have like more competition between those two, we will have better representation of the people and the more democracy. And this is the most principle of democracy. Okay, second, let's look at the participation. If we have this electrical voting in place, obviously we'll have more participation because people would get easier access to the voting. Okay, second, let's look at the social benefits. So there will be better services to minorities and both minorities and majorities. And we will have more social programs for the interest of people for both minorities and majorities because a lot of people would actually go and more participate. So we will have more opinions on a variety of thoughts. That's what we see here. We need a lot of people to vote. That's why we need this electronic process of voting. So that's why, because we need more effective democracy, because we actually need representation of both majorities and minorities, we think on side proposition we're very proud to propose this.
Opposition never said that democracy as it is was a perfect system. But on the other hand, we see that the step that today's side government is proposing is a step in the wrong direction. And I will show you in my speech two particular reasons why that's so. But before I go into that, let me just quickly brush over what the contribution that we've heard from the second government table. If I understand them correctly, all they're proposing is just the implementation of digital democracy or digital voting, and this is what they're proposing and is leading upon. So with that, side second opposition is very, very deeply accepts the proposition from the side second government because we see that electronic voting is already present in certain representative democracies, and we see that it's working out fine, so we don't have a problem with that. We had a similar system to that was like a complement of direct personal democracy and electronic democracy implemented not so long ago in Egypt, where people went to the polls but they voted electronically. It sped up the calculation process. So with what the side proposition is proposing, we don't have a problem, except for very small part where they said that this electronic voting would actually improve the situation for the minorities, where we have to disagree. We see that minorities are especially problematic with implementing like those complex systems of voting. We saw the example of European Roma in Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary, where a lot of Romani communities were not able to cast their vote actually because they didn't know how the electoral process worked. So we see that especially in the case of the electronic voting, their argument that this is better for the democracies for minorities simply doesn't hold, because the minorities especially need special effort in understanding this political process and why it should be complicated. But anyways, this is not the crux of this debate. Let's go to two major questions on what is particularly wrong with this liquid democracy. Now, the first problem that we on the side of the second opposition have is, and we pose this problem 2 times in our points of information, is who is the governing body? We feel that this question is particularly important for this debate because the governing body is the one that supposedly proposes the legislation, and second problem is the governing body is the one that holds the accountability for the decisions that are made. We see that in the proposal of today's side government, the governing body is either delegates, either all the people, or somewhere in the scale between. So we ask the questions, who is actually accountable for the decisions that are made, not just in one particular second, but over the course, for example, of one regular representative mandate, like 4 years, we see that no one is actually accountable. And we have a problem with that because there is very small responsibility relation between the person, the voter who casts the vote, and the rest of the world. Why we see that this is problematic? We see that what happens is that a group of people who wants to pass a specific piece of policy can very easily just sweep in, get, for example, the trust of the people who give the votes to the delegates, and then pass this particular policy. We see that then they have no responsibility or no accountability to the country, to the people, to the world over what this particular piece of policy actually does. Let's just take an example of Halliburton, who would just maybe sweep in and just impose like a legislation of that there can be oil spills anywhere they want them to be, and then just swoop in. And they would certainly get the support of the delegates because they are very powerful and they could offer them, they could actually exploit them. They could offer them bribes because they're so much powerful. So we see that this gives like an disproportionate amount of power to private companies who have a lot of particular interests, but they do not have the long-term responsibility or accountability to the people. And we see that this power relation is very wrong. Go, sir.
That is a natural process that happens every time you vest power in someone else. It is no different from from anything you propose on your side, where the Tea Party can do the same thing in the Southern
No, but the thing is, Barack Obama cannot just go ahead and blatantly support Halliburton's interests because he's accountable to the people who elected him also for other things, okay? But if Halliburton or a representative Halliburton sweeps in and just wants to pass this particular part of the policy, he will not be accountable for any other parts of the decision that will be made. And we see that this is very problematic. Now, the second problem we have here is that there is no political continuity. Okay, we believe that political decisions and the cornerstone of what democracy is not just listening to what people want in particular second. Okay, we want, especially in developing countries that they brought up as their example, we want to have like continuity and progress in the development, in the direction in which development is going, what are going to be priorities and things like that. Okay, and we see that here in their proposal, what happens is that policies that will most likely get passed are policies that serve particular self-interest in the very second and have no long-term continuity. We see that sometimes to achieve a certain effect in a population or in an economy of a country, it's not just important that you pass one decision, but you have to pass a couple of decisions in a row. You have to make compromises with other parties. And the fact is that not all of the decisions are like combinable. Okay, for example, you cannot just simply cut tax breaks on a lot of companies and then on the other hand have a big social state that would be able to provide a lot of benefits for the people. Okay, some decisions are just not compatible, and with this we're creating like a very short-term thinking with a lot of decisions that could be influence one another. We see the example of this, for example, in China a couple of decades ago, where China decided to go on a very strict right-handed economy policy that was not particularly, people were not particularly fond of this particular policy, and probably Chinese people in that moment would have voted against this policy. But now 20 years later, China is actually, 20 years later, China is actually one of the most fast developing economies in the world. So we see that in the long run, that was a good policy that wouldn't have been good for the people in that particular sector. We see that also their example was India, on how this would actually enfranchise people that are now disenfranchised. But we see that there is also a huge risk of exploitation of such people. We see that India is a great example of a country where we have people who can actually buy articles about themselves in the media and write whatever they want to do. They have like body doubles of their prime minister going around and communicating with people. And we see that especially in the countries that have very vast, very uneducated population, but at the same time they need very strict development into a very strict direction. We see that this is particularly problematic. Now the second problem that we have with this is that because of this, we're undermining the informal political participation, okay? Because we believe that political discourse is much more than just casting vote, saying yes or no to a particular proposal. We see that already in representative democracy, there is a lack of political discourse, but we see that with their proposal, political discourse will fall even more. Why? First of all, because it disincentivizes like big actors to listen to the little people, okay? The power relation here is changed. Now it's us trying to convince politicians that our ideas are good. But then the power relation will change around and the politicians will be the ones that will be trying to convince us. First of all, this is bad because it passivizes the people. It actually doesn't give them incentive to be as active and as informed. And second of all, the power relation is unhealthy because the big actors that are now convincing us have a lot of power than the people who are actually convincing the big actors. So we see that there is much more possibility of exploitation. And because of all those reasons, we back into the post.
Now we invite the government whip speaker to conclude their case.
Let me educate side proposition the pillars of democracy. One, the pillars of democracy include representation, participation, and accountability. And I'll show you why side proposition doesn't address this, using two main questions. One, which side better addresses the pillars of democracy, right? And secondly, which which side betters democracy in its way, in general, right, ladies and gentlemen? So we look at what democracy is. We look at countries like South Africa, which are between developing and developed countries. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as a South African myself, I know what actually happens within South Africa. Right, let's look at the government system within South Africa. Right, we think that, ladies and gentlemen, I as a citizen in South Africa actually vote for groups like ANC, ladies and gentlemen, and NTA, which are the main parties in South Africa that are in competition right now. We've got so many political parties within South Africa, but those two actually prioritize within the South African borders. But ladies and gentlemen, why do I value this kind of information, I ask myself? Because one, those political parties are formed by society, ladies and gentlemen. One thing they ignored, for one. Secondly, ANC, ladies and gentlemen, was built because of the apartheid area to actually ensure that the development of South Africa is actually taken care of. They were built by society, and that's what proves that the opposition actually ignores this fact, ladies and gentlemen. Now, secondly, we think that why do we value society's perspective in things? Because one, they know what's good for them. Two, they know what to do in order to actually ensure their significant development. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what was not taken, right? There was a point of information information given out by side opposition, which was about who is government, in this case that was illegitimate. Now we tell you, with parties like ANC, where you get each and every member actually put in at the end of the day, where we look at original participation in terms of elections, right? We tell you, Jeremiah Salah, ladies and gentlemen, was voted in because he was a ward now who wanted to actually make Langlagte a better place. Where I live, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that representation was actually given out by society, the same society that opposition doesn't seem to actually want to value, right, ladies and gentlemen? Now then, what does this then prove? We tell you Jeremiah Salah has done so much good for Langlagte. One, he built a train station. Two, he built more houses than what other warders could actually do. Now, why do we value this? We think that society knew that Jeremiah Salah would do something good for them, and that's why they actually voted him in the first place. Now, one, we think that opposition thinks society is actually irrational. It actually hurts me because they are society themselves. We think that proves they are also irrational, and that's why we should not take their matter. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we also have this very big debate about majority versus minority. Now, one, we tell you we value majority, we value minority. Now, how do we do this? We think the minority are those parts of society that actually prefer the IEC over DA and ANC. Now, why do we think this in these society are still taken care of? One, they're still given houses at the end of the day because ANC thinks they are part of the society, even though they don't vote for them, they still have to be contributed to at the end of the day. Now, why the side proposition is one question we ask opposition. Why do they ignore this, ladies and gentlemen? Because at the end of the day, the same minority actually benefits from this, ladies and gentlemen, from liquid democracy. We don't get how then via digital voting, ladies and gentlemen, all of a sudden this caused war within countries, this caused lack of development, ladies and gentlemen. If that's the case, let them provide us a better solution to ensure that Jeremiah Salah should not be voted for. Instead, someone else, ladies and gentlemen, like Helen Zilla, should be voted for Langlagte, ladies and gentlemen. That's why they lose today's debate, because they ignore the fact that society contributes to the development of the country, not just because the government is there, and not just because they want to ensure development within these countries. It's highly irrational for a side opposition to actually contradict a specific policy given, but then they don't give a specific solution to actually better the development of countries like South Africa or third world countries where they actually are undeveloped, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why they lose today's debate. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we ask ourselves a side proposition: how do we incentivize those parts of society that actually don't vote to actually vote at the end of the day with this policy we actually supporting? Right? One, they ensure development within themselves as a community, as a region, as a country, and as a nation, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that within each and every part of society, within countries like South Africa, they want to actually ensure that their society is actually built by the government they actually voted. Now, one, within the representation is actually taken care of, how, ladies and gentlemen, one, we vote ANC, and ladies and gentlemen, we might get people that say Jacob Zuma is a bad person, and yada, yada, yada. We get that. We think that, ladies and gentlemen, if society, we think that it doesn't mean just because Jacob Zuma is part of the ANC, all of a sudden the ANC is bad. Why not actually implement a policy to actually go against Jacob Zuma and keep ANC at the end of the day? We think that the value of representation that's given by the pillars of democracy and society actually values the perspective of society. That's why we value society. Right, we tell you ladies not taken. Right, we also at this point of campaigning and all of that, how they want to protect politics. We don't get how digital voting actually contradicts this. One, even if it were so, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you these people are still able to campaign at the end of the day. You've got things like ads, ladies and gentlemen. You've got things like protests, vote for me, vote for you actually get what you want, ladies and gentlemen. But we still don't get how digital voting contradicts all of that and contradicts the values of voting at the end of the day. Why do we value voting of society and voting of the government, ladies and gentlemen? We think that this ensures stability within these countries. Now, ladies and gentlemen, going to my second question. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you what is government's mandate in today's case? We think it's to protect and provide. Now, how do we make sure that society is actually protected and provided for? One, they're given their rights actually maximized. What rights are we talking about? The right to choices and the right to be involved in a political party. Now, why do we value these rights? One, they're within the Constitution of South Africa, of countries like South Africa. One. Secondly, we think that if society wants, with countries like South Africa, with one of the best constitutions, but then we get governments side opposition that still don't want to value society's morals and perspectives, we think that's why they lose today's debate. Value society, and then we can speak to you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, this whole part of influence, right? We didn't get the primary reason why we shouldn't let society vote via digital mechanisms. We value digital mechanisms that are created for a reason, and would rather value them in the right way. Now, ladies and gentlemen, why do we think majority and minority could actually work hand in hand in this case, ladies and gentlemen? We think that, ladies and gentlemen, this also brings up this whole point of participation of society within that. You can either actually have a representative to actually vote for you, or you can do it directly. We still tell you we value the choice of society. We give them a choice to actually do what they want. But then if they don't do what they want, ladies and gentlemen, it's their choice at the end of the day. And that's why side proposition takes today's debate, and closing government actually takes today's debate. Thank you.
All right, and now for the last speaker of the debate and to close opposition's case, the whip speaker.
Madam Speaker, I thank you very much for the floor. It gives me enormous pleasure to be able to be part and to conclude today's debate. Now, the motion before the House is that this House supports the implementation of liquid democracy via digital voting. And this is something that I would like to remind the second, or rather the closing government of, that who have unfortunately completely forgotten the entire first part of the motion, the liquid democracy part. Because as the closing opposition today have explained to you nicely, is that firstly, the implementation of the digital voting system is not in any way, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be implemented in the existing status quo. So we might go for that, right? As the speaker has explained. But before I go on, 2 points of rebuttal directly to what has been kind of explained and espoused before, right before me, right? So as far as I got, the madam before me was kind of explaining about the success of the African National Congress in South Africa. But we find this to be a really, really weird example. Why? Because it's an example of success, of enormous kind of democratic victory that has happened under the status quo, ladies and gentlemen. We did not need liquid democracy for that. We did not need electronic voting for that. So it is an unprecedented example of how the existing system can work if it's implemented properly, if we have politicians that are righteous, if we have people in there that really care about their country. And it is the status quo that won in this case. So we don't really see what the point that they're trying to make here is. Now, second point is about the apathy and how this debate is supposed to be all about the right to be involved in the political process, which I find to be kind of a weird measure here. Because if you choose to talk about the right to be involved, it's kind of weird to kind of admit to the point that most of the people don't really care about this right, are apathetic about the political system and the policies that are being implemented in their country, and basically just don't care about what's going on. So we find here another burden and another point that's much more important in terms of kind of providing for the people. And this is two major questions. No, thank you, madam. Firstly, which system best safeguards democracy, right? So which system provides more democracy or better sort of democracy in the long term, in general? And secondly, which system creates better decisions, better policies, again, in the short and in the long run? And these two questions, I think, are the crux of today's debate and will form the majority of my speech. But before that, let me go to the first point. The devil is always in the details. Now, liquid democracy seems like an interesting concept. It's awesome. It gives us more power, yada, yada, yada. But now, what we found to be problematic here, and it has been pointed out in POIs, in speeches before, is basically we still don't get, after 4 speeches by the side of the government, ladies and gentlemen, how this is actually going to work. Now, basically what we got from the opening government here is basically answering the question of the executive branch of the government, the most crucial branch, I dare say, in today's debate, just by waving it off saying, oh, we're discussing the legislative branch today, so we don't really care who implements the policies. But what we're saying today is that the crux of our political system is how these policies are actually going to be implemented. Who is going to implement them? Who is going to be the prime minister? Who is going to form the cabinet?
Please,
who is going to write the actual law? Because I don't really see people writing the law like on Wikipedia or something. We didn't get the answers to these questions, and these are crucial questions. Now moving on, which system safeguards democracy better? Now we have two major points here: the magic balance of direct and representative democracy that the open government is talking about, and secondly, the major point of accountability, and thirdly, the political discourse. So firstly, the magic balance of direct and representative democracy. We didn't actually see any kind of an explanation as to which way the system, the magic balance, is going to shift towards. So what we're going to do, we're going to assume. So what we're going to probably see under their system is basically not like 100 delegates, but like thousands or tens of thousands. So what we're going to see is like a fragmentation of political power, basically and very simply. Now we have two scenarios under this scenario. Firstly, the scenario of apathetic voters. What's the danger under their system of these apathetic voters? So basically, these are the people that are going to delegate their votes for basically nothing.
So
maybe it's money, maybe it's like a candy bar, because they just don't care, they do not get involved into the process. So it's much easier to bribe them and get their votes and get their support. Secondly, what we see with these apathetic voters is that they will delegate their votes and never look back. Why? Because they don't care. So what we're going to see is, again, kind of an amassing of power, of voter power to the people that can grab as many votes as possible. Usually private interests, usually corporations, usually people we don't really want to see with that much power. Secondly, what the fragmentation of interest is going to lead into is, again, more populism instead of less. Why? Because of the simple strategy of divide and conquer, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to see it's going to be much easier for people to grab the power towards themselves, because there's no term limit, right? Secondly, accountability. We're going to see a lack of accountability here, because it's not really clear what the people that have our votes stand for. It's not really clear who is making the decisions. It's impossible for us as voters really judge whether a person is a good decision maker or not. And this is extremely problematic because, thirdly, it leads to a worsening political discourse. It lessens the interest of the people, they have the vote, it lessens the will to compromise. And this leads me to the second major point, the third major point, the system creates better decisions. And in order for a decision to be good, I think it needs to satisfy two criteria. It has to be a compromise to be a good policy. And secondly, it has to be a strategic decision, a strategic policy, right? And in order for it to be a compromise, how do we create a policy under their system that best represents everybody, right? So we have two scenarios here. We either have a majority rule that tramples on the less powerful, right? Or on the second scenario, we have a standstill, because nobody here is actually tasked with creating a compromise policy. Nobody really wants to compromise. How is it that we're going to have a compromise policy under the plan? We never heard that answer, right? Secondly, is it going to be a strategic decision? A policy that takes into account the long term, right? So we're going to have a lack of continuity. This is something that we've really explained to you before. We need development, and we need decisions that are going to lead to sustainable development, sustainable investments. An unsustainable, unclear kind of a political system is not really going to attract investments, so on and so forth. And secondly, who is going to make the difficult choices? Who is going to make the choices for difficult reforms, unpopular reforms? No one under their system. No one, ladies and gentlemen. So because it leads to worse decisions, to a worse system of safeguarding democracy, because they didn't really give us the nitty-gritty details that we wanted, we beg you to oppose the motion.